trouble. And boy, I found her. She's in love with herself. She likes the dark. Grey Wolf Studios.
Speaking of temperatures, one of the big things that can run up the temperature of your ESC is running all your other electronics off of it as well as the motor, which is what they're designed for. And the way they're designed to do that is what's called a BEC, or a battery elimination circuit. And if you want a whole rundown on BECs, and if you want to learn in-depth information about BECs, I have a separate video called BECs 101. You can look it up on my on my YouTube channel and check that out. But basically, so since it pertains to the ESCs, because just as far as I know, every brushless ESC out there has a built-in BEC as well. At least every one I've ever used does. The vast majority of them do. Now, what the BEC does is it basically, let's use my electric LST2. I have a 1/8 scale monster truck called an LST2. It's made by Lowe's. It used to be a nitro. It doesn't come in electric, but they make an electric conversion kit for it. And I ended up putting a Tekin motor and an RX-8 in it, and I run it on a 6-cell LiPo. Now, that thing takes a lot of punishment. So what I've done is, instead of running all the electronics through, okay, so what usually happens is you hook your electronics up to your speed controller as well as your motor. And there's, inside the ESC, there's a BEC, or battery elimination circuit, that basically takes the incoming voltage. In the case of my LST2, it would be 22.2 volts for a 6S LiPo, or if it's fully charged, actually even a little more than that, 25.5 or so, 26, something like that. It takes that 25 or 26 volts or whatever it is, and it basically, it takes that as an input, and it outputs 6 volts. It's typically 6 volts. Some ESCs you can set it for different settings on what the voltage output is for your other electronics. But typically we're talking 6 volts. Anyway, it cuts that 25, 26 volts all the way down to 6 volts. And in order to get rid of the extra power, the BEC basically outputs heat. That's what happens to the extra voltage. It gets turned into heat. Now, what ends up happening is a lot of your ESCs has what's called a linear BEC built into it. And linear BECs are much less efficient than what's called a switching BEC. Switching BECs don't get nearly as hot because they deal with the energy much more efficiently. But linear ESCs are cheaper, so a lot of times, now maybe not so much in the high-end electronics, but definitely in your budget grade electronics, and even some of the better electronics still have the linear BECs built into them. But even if it doesn't, even if it is a switching BEC, you can still take that load off of the ESC by using what's called an external BEC. An external BEC, I have one actually hooked up. Let me back out here. I actually have an external BEC hooked up to this Sidewinder speed controller here. This is a switching BEC, can handle up to 3 amps continuous, 5 amps max. It can handle 2 cell LiPo all the way through 6 cell LiPo. So it can handle anything all the way up to 20, 25, 26 volts. And you can set this particular one is it's a budget grade BEC, but it still is switchable between 5 volts and 6 volt output. By moving this jumper here, you can switch it to 5 or 6 volts, whichever you want to use. It's almost always going to be 6 volts or higher. So anyway, if you use a BEC, an external BEC, then all of your electronics in your kit are going to draw their power. Because see, I have, if you follow the power cord here on this, it actually goes up and it's soldered to the battery connector itself. So basically what happens is all of my electronics are now powered directly from the battery through the BEC, the external BEC, and thereby lifting the load on your speed controller. Now, this is particularly valuable for ESCs, like lower end ESCs or hobby grade ESCs. Like take the Castle Sidewinder ESC for example. It's basically the smallest of the 10th scale Castle ESCs. So if you're running it in an application where it's kind of where it's kind of borderline capable, like technically it's capable of handling the load, but it runs pretty warm because it's cutting it pretty close or whatever. Well, you can take some of that strain off the ESC by using this external BEC rather than the internal one. Another thing you can do, the Sidewinder ESC, as you can see, I have a fan mounted on the top of mine. The Sidewinder and a lot of your smaller ESCs and some of your budget ESCs and stuff will come with just a heat sink and no fan. Again, just like using an external BEC, if you can mount a fan on an ESC that doesn't already have one, you'll just take that much more load off of your ESC because your ESC will stay cooler. Therefore, heat is detrimental to electronics. So the cooler you can keep your ESC, the longer life it should have. And I did this one just simply by taking 4 screws that are designed for PC fans, 80mm PC fans, and I took them and screwed them down in between the heat sink fins, and then I took a little shoe glue and put on top the screws and just glued the fan to the top of the screws. This is totally reversible. If I wanted to take this fan off of here, shoe glue is very strong, but it is actually, you can actually separate whatever you have glued using the shoe glue. You can separate it without breaking it. And then I could just simply back the screws out. But anyway, so that's a little information about the built-in BECs and BECs in general. Now I have even more information in my BEC 101 video, although I think I just covered half of it right there for you. So anyway, little BEC information. All right, so since we've already touched on the Castle amp ratings for their ESCs and stuff, let me go ahead and cover that and just get it out of the way. Before I give you the rundown on the approximate amp ratings for the various Castle ESCs, And by the way, this only applies to the 10th scale and 8th scale. Castle now makes 5th scale electronics, which I don't do any 5th scale stuff, so I don't have any 5th scale information for you. I'm sorry. Don't have detailed information on any of the 5th scale stuff. But so let's just cover a couple of things. There is the Sidewinder, like this ESC right here is a Sidewinder SCT. Castle also makes one called a Sidewinder V2. They're the exact same ESC. The only thing different is the sticker. The specs are the same. They look the same. They're identical. Why they made one and called it a short course truck short course truck edition, I have no idea, because they're the same thing as the V2. The Mamba and likewise the Mamba Max Pro, like this one, there's a Mamba Max Pro SCT or short course truck edition for that as well. And again, the short course truck edition has the same exact specs as the Pro. It's the same ESC, just instead of a black and yellow sticker, it's got a green and yellow sticker. Anytime you see somebody refer to a Mamba Max, they're actually referring to the original Mamba Max, which got replaced by the Mamba Max Pro. The original Mamba Max is no longer made. Just like there is an original Sidewinder. Before the V2 and the SCT came out, there was an original Sidewinder. It's no longer made either. I don't know what the specs on it are. Yeah, some people refer to the Mamba Monster Max as just the Mamba Monster. When they do that, they're actually talking about the Mamba Monster Max. If you hear somebody say Mamba Monster, they're talking about the Mamba Monster Max. It's not like the Mamba Max and the Mamba Max Pro that replaced it. It's not the same thing. It wasn't. There was an original Mamba Monster, and then it got replaced with a Mamba Monster Max. That's not the case. It's always been Mamba Monster Max. It's just some people shorten it to Mamba Monster. So now that I got all that confusing stuff out of the way with the various incarnations of the Castle ESCs, I'll go ahead and give you the rundown. I have basically from the micro size all the way up to the 1/8 scale size. So we're going to start with the Sidewinder Micro, which has a 3-cell max, 3-cell LiPo max, and it has a maximum of 25 amps continuous. The Micro Pro is again 3S max or 3-cell max, but it can handle up to 50 amps instead of 25. Then you move up into the Sidewinder V2 or the Sidewinder SCT. These handle up to 3-cell LiPo and up to approximately 75 amps. Then you move up to the Mamba Max Pro and the Mamba Max Pro SCT. These guys can handle up to 6S or 6-cell LiPo and up to about 100 amps. Then you move up to the Mamba Monster Max, which also does up to 6S. And here's the one place where I ran into a discrepancy in the post versus what I was told on the phone. The post that I originally read said that the Mamba Monster Max only handles up to 125 amps. The guy I got that backward. The post said that it handles up to 150 amps. The guy on the phone told me it only handles 125 amps. Which one is true? I don't know. I'm more inclined to believe 150 amps rather than 125, just because your average 1/8 scale ESC, which once you get up to the Mamba Monster Max is a 1/8 scale ESC, your average 1/8 scale ESC is about 150 amps continuous. Even your hobby grade ones are typically 150 amps. So I don't know whether it's 125 or 150. I'm more inclined to believe it's 150, but I have no solid proof of that. I don't have any solid proof of any of this. This is just, like I said, this is what I got from one of their tech people, and the combination of that and a post on some forum. I don't even remember where it was, a couple years back. So anyway, let's move on from that. Well, you know what? Okay. So let's go ahead and talk also about, since we're talking about various models of Castle speed controllers. Castle is a very popular form of speed controller, by the way. Tekin is better quality, but Castle is still good quality. It's high quality, but it's cheaper than Tekin. So a lot of people tend to migrate more to the Castles than the Tekins, um, just because of the cost factor. Castle makes a good product. The problem with Castle is Castle's kind of like your Cadillac of bashing electronics. Um, they don't have any censored motors, which we you know, in the motor section I've covered censored and censorless motors, and even the dual drive mode motors. And if you're gonna race, you want a censored ESC and a censored motor. Castle has no motors that are censored. Now they do have one ESC that is censored, which is the Mama Max Pro, or Mama Max Pro SCT. Now both of these are censored, but none of their motors are censored. So kind of not even sure. I'm kind of not even sure why they made the Mama Max Pro censored. I don't know. I guess, you know, if you want to mix and match your electronics, I guess you can use a Mama Max Pro censored with some other motor. But anyway, so since the majority of their stuff um, is sensorless, it is going to be cheaper than like the racing grade uh, stuff, like more like Tekin. Now don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people that race Castle motors and ESCs and stuff, and you know they even you know, some of them do good. But if it was me and I was going to race, I wouldn't race anything but the best. And the best, in my opinion, for racing is censored, and the best for quality, in my opinion, is Tekin. Now, like I said, that, you know, if you just want to bash, or you just play around when you're racing, you know, if you're not a serious racer, you want to save yourself a few bucks, Castle's still good quality. And they have some really good motors and stuff out there for bashers. I wouldn't personally race them. So anyway, so what HPI did was, on all of their electric kits, they basically have rebadged Castle electronics, both the motors and the ESCs. And they're essentially the same exact thing, only they have different names. They like I said, they're rebadged for HPI. And I'll basically give you a rundown of the HPI flux. All of the HPI refers to all of its brushless systems as flux systems, FLUX, flux systems. So I'll explain the difference, or I'm sorry, not the difference, but I'll explain which flux system is comparable to, you know, which regular Castle system. So let's start with the Sidewinder, the smallest of the 10th scale ESCs made by Castle. The HPI Flux version, or variant, if you will, of the Sidewinder is called an HPI Motive. or Motiv. I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. M-O-T-I-V. Motiv, whatever. It's the same thing as a Sidewinder. It's the same specs. Then you move up to the HPI Q-Base, Q-B-A-S-E, Q-Base, and which is essentially HPI's version of the Mamba Max Pro. Same exact specs. And then their 1/8 scale version of the Mamba Monster Max is called an HPI Blur. Again, same specs as an MMM, just has a different sticker on it. You can even use the programming cards and the programming, the computer programming adapter on the HPI versions of those ESCs to set the different settings and whatever. The only thing you can't do is you can't update the firmware on the HPI versions because the firmware is slightly different. But you can use the Castle Link system or the Castle programming cards to set all of the settings in an HPI Flux version of the Castle electronics.